and welcome to the second panel discussion for the 2020 Africa Security Symposium. We have a number of esteemed panelists from various backgrounds in our panel today in order to discuss the impact of border shutdowns and delivery of humanitarian aid, be it in the form of goods or services. And as such, I'd like to introduce them to our audience. Our first panelist is Major General Mainasara Masanawa, a Commandant of the Nigerian Army, a part of the Nigerian Armed Forces. Secondly, we have Jane Strangways, the Country Director of Somaliland from Halo Trust. Laurie Clapton, the Country Director Somalia, also from Halo Trust. Koos Hubert, Technical Advisor from DCD Mobility. And last but not least, Tim Leary, the Program Director from Wilpert. I will be the panel chair for this session, and my name is Graham Walker. I'm a marketing executive for the global military defense and civil security company, Saab. Our vision at Saab is that it's a human right for everyone to feel safe, and we achieve this by pushing intellectual and technological boundaries. In this rapidly changing world, where new threats continue to emerge, we firmly believe in the right of countries, institutions, and individuals to protect their freedom and safety. It's a belief born out of our history, and for over 8 decades, our products and solutions have been helping to create safer societies around the world. We're building on that heritage by empowering our world-class employees to break new ground. By thinking innovatively, we're pushing intellectual and technological boundaries, keeping us ahead of today's complex defense and security challenges. Our thinking also embodies drive, expertise, and trust, values that help us work collaboratively and pragmatically together with our customers and partners. But it's the products and solutions that emerge from our thinking that give us a distinct advantage over our competitors, and we call that our thinking edge. Focusing on today's session, this panel will look at the effects of worldwide border closures as popular transit routes throughout sub-Saharan Africa are blocked. This has hindered the delivery of humanitarian goods and has an impact on demining projects. Whilst initiatives in route clearance have played a vital role in providing safe areas for communities to rebuild, the coronavirus pandemic has exacerbated risks in clearing the final miles and highlighted transportation challenges on the continent. Furthermore, building upon the African Security Symposium 2019 discussions, panelists will assess the implications of an undocumented economy and the absence of a centralized database, further considering the far-reaching consequences in tracing the spread of the disease in Africa's porous borders. We will touch on capabilities and technologies that are central to operations focused on border safeguarding, border security, and border management operations. From the keynote address and everyone's lived experiences in 2020, we are indeed living in conditions that are dubbed the new normal. We have seen the impact that COVID has had on people, cultures, economies, and the environment. And Africa has not been spared the aftermath and effects of the COVID pandemic. In these trying times, each nation state has been fighting for their own survival in economic terms and has to find the resources, both physical and financial, to support their citizens. Within Africa, when certain communities have felt vulnerable or threatened, there have been occasions that they'll decide to migrate and seek refuge in neighboring states or even venture further afield in search of better economic conditions. This has been the case during COVID, and although there have been strict measures to curb movement of people across borders, but one can argue that most countries in Africa don't have adequate or persistent border security and surveillance solutions to curb the migration of people. It is within this context of this broad pattern of migration throughout Africa, and in line with a vision for a single Pan-African continent, that we have to reflect on what has transpired during these first months of 2020. But before we go any further, I'll allow the panelists to provide a quick overview in order to shed some context of their experiences relating to border safeguarding, border security, and border management operations. So I'll ask first if General Masanawa will just provide a brief introduction and contextualize his participation in today's panel.
Like for the COVID-19 in Nigeria, the government, in order to control the illegal movement of arms and ammunition into the country because of our fight against insurgency, all our borders, land borders have been closed. So really, we were well ahead in border control even before the outbreak of the pandemic. And a lot of security measures have been put in place. Indeed, we are lacking in technological know-how or technological availability for us to secure or patrol our borders. This issue has been discussed even during our last session in Addis Ababa. And quite all right, we all know due to maybe economic situation, we cannot acquire most of the equipments we require to patrol or secure our borders. Indeed, our border is wide and porous, with over 88 illegal border routes which were identified earlier, apart from the legitimate border where we have the security agencies. So Nigeria is in dire need of technological know-how, technological equipment on how to patrol our vast land border and even sea border. I think I should stop here and allow other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General. Jane, over to you.
Graham, thank you. In terms of the border challenges that they're facing in Somaliland, Halo, as you know, predominantly has cleared, as the only mine clearance agency in country, has cleared the majority of the mine contamination and explosive hazards that were left as a legacy of war over a 20-year period. What we are now facing is the majority of contamination that remains is along the Somaliland-Ethiopian border. It is also a porous border, and obviously there's an enormous amount of traffic that comes in from Ethiopia towards the Berbera port. We've got a lot of nomadic herdsmen and people transiting that border, and the remaining contamination, as I say, between Somaliland and Ethiopia presents a significant risk, not only to the immediate local communities, but those populations that are transiting over that border, and that's the concern that Halo has, and I'll talk more about the detailed project that we are undertaking to meet that challenge, and a very aspirational project that seeks to tackle that once and for all. But yeah, that in essence is the challenge that Halo faces. And I should say that we are looking in Halo Somaliland along that border, as I say, with Somaliland and Ethiopia, but my colleague, and perhaps I'll pass over to Laurie, is looking at the geographical area of Somalia to the south. But we face one and the same challenge in terms of explosive hazards that remain from the legacy of war over a 40-year period.
Laurie.
Thank you very much, Jane. I think Jane well summed up the specific technical challenge that Halo faces on the border regions. We're looking at the explosive remnants of a war that happened 40 years ago. However, in Somalia, as we look at the northern border of Somalia, essentially with Ethiopia, you have different challenges to Somaliland. There's been more sustained conflict over the last 3 decades, really. There is a less homogeneous social milieu. You've got a great deal more clans. The stakes on the border are perhaps a little higher as well, with the sort of ongoing insurgency efforts in Somalia. And indeed, a lot of the issues that we're looking at in Somalia, as opposed to Somaliland, also includes sort of the more recent conflicts, looking at the control of small arms and light weapons and support to security forces in the Somali Defence Forces, such as Somali National Army and the Somali Police. So whilst we do carry out demining, we're also carrying out explosive management projects in support of the National Authority, and also direct security sector support projects with the police and military. Jane and I will discuss further sort of the broader approach that we're taking across the Horn of Africa, but it really does cover all of those issues, from explosive management, landmines, through to small arms and light weapons also. Over. Thank you.
I think there is just one more important point to make. Thank you, Laurie. I was just saying, to add to what he's saying, you know, HALO is now taking a more regional approach to these issues along the border, in line with the African Union initiative, but not looking at, as we have historically, at programs specifically in country, but looking more at the benefit, the socio-economic benefit to the region as a whole, and indeed the political and security challenges coming alongside that. So just taking a more regional approach, as I say, to that whole area.
Thank you. Chris, your introduction.
Thanks, Graham. Yes, we have a company in South Africa, DCD Protected Mobility, and we supply hardware or vehicles for two different applications. The one is really for route clearance operations performed by combat engineers, which is very much different to demining or mine clearance. And the other products we supply is the Springbok armored vehicles. We've been supplying these vehicles to a number of our African countries, and they are operating in various border operations, especially on the Kenya-Somalia border. Some vehicles are operating within Somalia by one of the troop contributing countries. And the purpose of our contribution is really to provide equipment for the military forces and the police forces to perform their jobs in a very difficult environment. We know about all the threats, the militias on the continent, and we've had several cases where our vehicles have been involved in these incidents, and luckily nobody has been killed. So we are very happy to contribute in that way by saving the lives of the soldiers.
Good initiatives. Thank you, Chris. And then Tim.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Tim Leary. I work for a company called Wolpert. I'm kind of unique to this panel, I think, because I volunteered to bring a geospatial component to it. You know, Jane mentioned the border between Ethiopia and Somalia. It's not well mapped. It's a line that, you know, someone drew on a map, and culturally the people on either side of that line are similar. And so, you know, I wanted to, you know, bring geospatial discussion into the topic of borders. I've been with Wolpert for about 4 years. Wolpert's a 109-year-old architecture, engineering, and geospatial company, one of the largest AEG companies in the United States. We do have an office in South Africa, as well as one in Canada. And one of my focuses is to integrate and work very closely with that South African office, doing business development as well as mapping across the continent. I actually did map on the continent back in 2016. I did a mapping program in Niger. I've been to Djibouti, Burkina Faso, many places in Africa, Ghana. And I just look forward to having this conversation and bringing, like I said, a mapping perspective to the idea of borders in Africa. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. So, yeah, we can see that within our panel today, we've got a broad range of experiences and backgrounds, and hopefully we can, you know, engage together and discuss some of these topics and come up with quite a nice panel discussion for the African Security Symposium. So I'd like to start, and my first question will go to General Masanawa, and just to see, during the COVID pandemic, if you could please share some of your experiences that Nigeria has been facing, some of the security challenges that Nigeria is facing at the moment, both in terms of its land borders, and you touched on the maritime side as well, that you are faced with, and how COVID has affected the responses to these security challenges.
Yeah, thank you very much. Like I said, even before the pandemic, Nigeria's land borders were closed by the government in order to curtail or control the illegal movement of arms and ammunition, because you are aware we are fighting insurgency, which is separated not only in the northeastern part of the country, but down to the northwest and north central part of Nigeria. Now, with COVID-19, indeed the government introduced all the protocols necessary to address the movement backward of our particularly citizen screening of COVID-19, and then this, I think, up to 2 weeks before the security agencies, because initially there were no, actually took very long time before they were. However, like I said earlier, both the land border and the coastal border, they are all wide. Maybe the coastal border, there is even a much easier control, but the land border is too wide, and definitely it will require maybe the whole of the security agencies to be deployed in the absence of technology. So really, it's a big challenge to us. That's the reality.
Thank you, General. So thank you for sharing your experiences and the challenges faced in West Africa and in the Gulf of Guinea. And I think at this point, we can also jump across to the other side of Africa, and we can ask Jane or Laurie, from a different perspective, if you guys can shed some light on the security challenges that you are faced with during your operations.
Yeah, the security challenges, is it in respect to COVID-19 or the security challenges we are facing currently? Apart from COVID-19, our main problem really is the insurgency, kidnapping. That is our main security challenges all over, both the northeast, northwest, and north central. We have bandits that are kidnapping people even inside town now. And the forest is wide, it's large and vast. And indeed, we need a lot of UAVs to be able to patrol and monitor the movement of these bandits. That is the main challenges we are facing. You see, the problem is they don't wear a uniform, and they will not carry arms. By the time you go on daylight patrol, you will not know who is bandit, who is an ordinary citizen. But by the time they are willing to attack, then wherever they hit their weapons, they carry them, and wherever they hit their motorcycles, they brought them out and then move in a large convoy and carry out their attack. And the response truly is poor, because by the time they come and operate, before the nearest forward operating base where the military agencies are got to hear about it, they have already left and entered bush. And definitely, we don't have sufficient helicopters to start pursuing them around in the bush or to patrol the vast are some of the major challenges we're having.
Okay.
Graham, if I may, just on that, I mean, part of the reason I wanted to be on this panel was because there are technologies out there that can be used to, like, for example, right now there's satellites that get daily visits pretty much globally. So you can actually monitor large areas using satellite imagery on a daily basis and look for indicators of illegal crossings, deforestation, again, I think I'm hearing that technology and vast spaces, they don't meet in the middle, but I want to just bring a geospatial context into that, where there are technologies, whether it's, ISR with aircraft or whether it's satellites, there are ways to monitor and look for indicators of insurgents or illegal crossing and the movement of goods and services across a border.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
indeed,
think,
I will really appreciate that.
General, thanks for
Hello?
sharing the challenges that you're facing in Nigeria. And I think your conditions in Nigeria create a whole different, if we can say, aspect with regards to insurgency and border crossings. But as we mentioned, that's the West African perspective that Nigeria as a specific country is facing at the moment. But in terms of moving across to the Horn of Africa, I think Jane or Laurie, or Jane and Laurie, you can both provide a different perspective in terms of some of the security challenges you guys are facing in terms of your operations in East Africa.
Thank you very much, Graham. Yes, I'll go first on this one. As in sort of southern Somalia, the security situation is a lot more heightened, and security challenges really at the forefront of our operations. Generally, if security isn't good, then we don't operate. A great deal of the challenge that comes with security, I think actually was touched upon by the Major General, which is that it's very difficult to tell in areas in which non-state actors operate, the difference between non-state actors and the general armed civilians, if you will, of that area. And indeed, sometimes the situation changes quite often. So a lot of what we do in our operations is negotiate access and discover the sort of past linkages, access, and liaison that's necessary to facilitate our teams to be able to work in a certain place. We also recruit from the local communities that we work in order to buy that access, in order to, well, buy is the wrong word, but in order to facilitate the access that then allows us to work. So a great deal of our work is finding our space as an organization and then cooperating with local communities to make that happen. I think what perhaps is interesting to the question of border access and border facilitation in general, which is touched upon again by the Major General, which is that notion that in extremely porous borders, how does one go about policing or recording or understanding who transits across border lines, and indeed where are border lines drawn? It's very clear if you go to the border and speak to local people, they know exactly where border lines are drawn between their social groups. A local subclan knows exactly where the end of its subclan territory is. And that local knowledge that's the real effective border that exists. It's not the line on the map. Line on the map might be something that's useful to us in an international sense, but it's fairly interesting or useful to people in a local sense. And I think Jane will also perhaps have a perspective on this, but it's often very clear when you speak to people there, you speak to local governance, that the actual line of the border is more of a negotiated process between local authorities and local governance. And I think that's one that's interesting to our project, and I'll hand over to Jane on this point because it pertains to some of the work in the north. These borders are a negotiation and a process. But Jane, if you'd like to add something to that.
Yeah, Laurie, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, this is particularly pertinent to the situation that we've got going on in Somaliland. As I said, the majority of the residual explosive contamination, if you like, the minefields, are located along that very porous border with Ethiopia. And as Laurie said, those lines may be drawn on the map, but on the ground, the communities are very often either side of that notional line, and in very many cases in the areas that we're working, the minefields actually bisect the border, a critical point, because of course Halo, we work in 27 countries, but sadly we don't at the moment, and we want to pursue this, have registration to operate in Ethiopia. And that in the reality on the ground means that we are clearing explosive hazards on the Somaliland side of the border in communities that bisect that border, meaning that half that community is mirrored on the other side of the border and faces existing and continual explosive risks. community leaders say to us, well, you know, we want the whole community cleared. And so our vision is to do just that. And the project that we're launching, which is a 3-year multi-donor, multi-year project, has the vision of clearing that border once and for all of all explosive contamination, both on the Somaliland and on the Ethiopian side, because as Laurie said, those communities see themselves as one. They are Somaliland Somali and Ethiopian Somali, but that's a notional line.
So it's quite a different perspective in East Africa, and I hear some of the risks that you're dealing with are different from West Africa. So I think the next question, I think we should ask Chris and say, with DCD that provides mobility solutions, what are the type of operations along the border regions that DCD Mobility is involved in?
Thank you, Graham. Yes, our vehicles and our operators, or the operators of the different countries, patrol the borders on their side, of course, with the Husky mine detection vehicles in doing route clearance. And of course, route clearance involves landmines, IEDs, and probably reminiscence of war as well. Borders are long. They cannot be walked by foot. It takes too long. So detection by hand is too difficult. We call it mechanical route clearance. So we have different sensors on the Husky vehicles which pick up these IEDs and mines. It is a combat engineer's task, of course. And following these Husky vehicles is the MRAP vehicles, or the Springbok vehicles, which carry the infantry, you know, to provide protection to those people. Now, they are very successful because most of the borders in Africa are porous, as we've heard already. Even South Africa's borders are very porous. So you have insurgents coming from all sides and creating havoc. So as the military and the police try to keep these people as far away possible from the inland, this is where they contend and take the people head on. We are very successful with the vehicles, and as I said previously, they've had several hits already by remote detonated IEDs. And for those type of weapons, you know, you need good protection in your vehicles. So fortunately, we've been able to provide that comfort to our operators.
Okay. Well, it sounds like technology is at the forefront in terms of the design of the DCD vehicles. So we step across into a different type of technology. And for Tim, you mentioned that listening to the challenges of being able to monitor what's happening, who's crossing the borders. As Wilford involves architecture, engineering, and geospatial capabilities, how can you use geospatial data to provide situational awareness for border security, to monitor the flow of people and goods through the borders?
Okay. Yeah, so actually Wilford has done quite a bit with geospatial and COVID-19 here in the United States. We actually have built a GIS application, several of them, one that monitors the spread of the disease from a geographic perspective. And you can also do, you know, tracing of contact tracing. Then we also built an application for the U.S. government to actually track the spending against COVID-19 because you know they've got the CARES Act and several other acts where they're making monies available to states and governments. So from a geospatial perspective, GIS is a very powerful tool for basically mapping and monitoring and modeling how this disease has been spreading, but also how people move across the border. And then, as I stated earlier, with monitoring from space or from aircraft, you can find indicators of crossing locations in these porous borders. We are working with the African Union Border program to try to map and identify some of these borders much more accurately. And, I completely agree with what Jane said, that, culturally people are, their villages or their areas are just, there's a line drawn through the middle of a village, but culturally that's not a boundary. And somehow the countries have to work together to make a proper boundary where it both culturally and bureaucratically makes sense.
May I just step in there, just to say that
sure.
GIS is obviously an incredibly important component of what we do day to day. We have GIS specialists embedded in all our programs because mapping is a critical component of understanding where minefields start and end. We would like to pursue further avenues using technology. Indeed, we've just hosted the first global Halo drone trials to try and provide accurate mapping using drones. But I think there are potential opportunities for linkage between mine clearance agencies such as ourselves and Tim, your organisation, for example, to further advance linkage of accurate mapping and for more generally, which I think in some of these contexts is not happening, and there is an opportunity now for those agencies to pull together and create accurate and coherent mapping of those border areas.
No, I completely agree, Jane. That's one of the reasons why we
I think that's
initials with the African Union Border Patrol program. Africa, they want to get jurisdictional boundaries that make sense, and and it's all about economic stability, right? Without land record management and taxation, there's no economic stability, and there's no security if there's no economic stability. So it's a self-feeding mechanism.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's just been raised is talking about complementary capabilities. That it's not just a one solution fits all. So you're going to need a multitude of capabilities coming together to solve some of the challenges that Africa has. And with this on my mind, I want to come back to General Masinawa, and in the Nigerian context. For the Nigerian military, with the challenges that you're facing and the way things are going at the moment, do you focus more on conventional capabilities within the armed forces, or do you focus more on asymmetric or constabulary type capabilities? And how does that change in terms of your prioritization between operations, how you train people, and the budget that you get from the government in order to meet the demands that the Nigerian armed forces have?
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, we have to go through asymmetric because the war we are fighting is asymmetric. However, in a way, it's conventional because even though the insurgents are fighting asymmetric warfare, we cannot fight in their own way. We have to try and fight them wherever we find them. Like I said, once they hit their weapons and equipment, we cannot identify them again. So honestly, it's a very difficult situation. So it's only when they are in the bush that we go and carry out operations. But at the same time, every day you clear them, more are coming to attack you. You start wondering where are they coming from. Indeed, they are using us. And based on the equipment or based on the economy of the country, yes, the government, based on whatever they can afford to release to the security agencies, we procure some equipment. I remember, yes, DCD, I was there in 2015, and we recommended procurement of that husky. I went with an engineer officer in 2015. However, like I said, recommendation is different. The process of procurement or follow-up is not up to me. But I remember very well, I was in DCD. We actually you had a ride on the Husky vehicle and whatever. I can still recollect taking some fruits, you know, that I ate, which is in the compound. But that's a different story entirely. Making recommendation is different from implementing it based on the budgetary allocation to the armed forces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a very common trend, is that the armed forces are finding it in Africa, and I think throughout the world. I think the armed forces are finding it very difficult to find the financial resources from government to buy the equipment that they need to deal with these threats, when also facing responses to the COVID pandemic, and government has to try and find the balance at the end of the day.
That is it. That is the truth.
Yeah.
Graham, to your point, I believe that it's going to get worse before it gets better, because obviously the drain on these budgets this year is just starting, right? So the problem's only going to get worse until this pandemic is, you know, I'll say,
yeah,
solved and economies can start moving forward again.
That's correct.
But there was a word that that you pick up in terms of clearance, and I think in terms of our panel theme as well, that you talk about clearing the insurgents, and it triggered a question that I had for Jane and Laurie, and it's more about the need for further clearance inside Ethiopia in order for clearing the access routes to the border. And is Halo looking to sort of broaden the scope of its operations in that regard for the clearance and demining projects?
Yeah, Graham, it's interesting you asked that. We are initially going to look at clearing a buffer zone, a 6-kilometer buffer zone, because inevitably the differing conflicts have led to differing layers in proximity, mined areas approximate to the border. So you've got that first buffer zone that we will tackle, meaning that the border area is therefore cleared of contamination, but just slightly to the rear of that, then you've got military positions where there was another layer of mine laying. So clearing those access routes through to Somaliland, allowing all of those economic routes to flourish and greater prosperity through to the Berbera port is more than just clearing the border, but that's our initial phase. And then that will be broadened to clearance, for example, to the Eritrean Ethiopian border potentially at a later stage. So yeah, but I think importantly we face economic challenges with getting those trade routes cleared, and it's preventing the prosperity that could be happening in the Horn of Africa. And this will be an important first step into clearing those access routes and allowing that trade to get through to the ports.
Okay, so with the access routes, and this is now speaking with your initiative there, I think, Chris, what Jane has mentioned now, what equipment and techniques would you suggest to declare and keep the areas safe?
Well, as I said earlier, mine clearance is very much different to route clearance. So I think the type of equipment that the Halo Trust people have is the right equipment. Minefields are there, have been there for many years. So it's a very dangerous site, very dangerous area. You have to map that very accurately. And once you've done that, you have to keep it safe. You have to stop insurgents coming out to lay new landmines and new explosives. So I think once the job is done, you have to contain that area and keep it safe thereafter. So it'll be the host country's responsibility and their forces to take over the operation and maintain security on their borders. What we can offer from our side, of course, is the Husky vehicle and the troop carrying vehicles. It's very similar to what they use in the Caspers and all other MRAPs. And the product support from South Africa, of course, is very nice and very close by. Yes, that's what I would say. And also some of the neighboring countries there, like Kenya and Uganda, even Egypt have got some of our vehicles now. You know, they can add some value with their experience and the doctrine they use to support the people from those countries.
Yeah, thanks very much.
I think there's also an important point to make that specifically in Africa, that certainly in Somaliland, the functionality of those landmines is enduring. In other words, it's a problem that has to be faced and addressed, and will kill unwitting civilians that cross those areas 50 years later. It's not a simple case of. In other areas of the world, water ingress and various other conditions mean that a lot of that functionality is lost, but not in the case of Somaliland and Somalia. So it remains an enduring problem, or one which has to be tackled. And our view is the sooner the better.
Okay. I want to touch on another aspect now, and people have sort of alluded to the issues earlier on in our panel discussion. And I know, Tim, you touched on it, so I'll pose the question to you, Tim, and say, how accurately do you think the borders in Africa have been mapped? And how important an issue is this within the context of what we're discussing today?
Very good question. So, I mean, the short answer is that the borders are not well mapped in Africa. They were lines drawn on a map by colonists, or not necessarily local people. There's still many borders in Africa that are disputed, like Somalia and Ethiopia, Lake Tanganyika, down in southeast. So they're not accurately mapped. And then, one of the programs that we did previously, we went in and we actually looked at how the water flowed. If it flowed south, it was one country. If it flowed north, it was the other country. So we went in and we made this really accurate depiction of a border based on geography and geology. And then, of course, there's a village right in the middle there. So how do you address that? Well, obviously you have to go around the village because they're all one, unit of people. And so there's lots of ways to look at mapping borders and doing mapping for borders. But at the end of the day, you have to look at cultural boundaries as well. And to answer your question, I don't believe that African borders are well mapped. I think a bunch of Europeans drew lines on a map, and a lot of these countries have inherited those lines, and it doesn't represent the culture in the areas.
I think a very important point is managing cultural boundaries versus national state boundaries, and the conflict that arises from that. I'd like to ask Jane or Laurie a question, and then Tim, you can provide a comment on it. Other than just cultural and traditional national boundaries, do you think there's a difference between local government in terms of initiatives for border clearance operations, and do they have the same conception about border clearance as national government does? So, and if there's this discrepancy or divergent perspective between national government and sort of local government, how does HALO manage this within the benefits of their clearance operations?
Thank you for that question, Graham. I think Jane and I will both have slightly different perspectives on this, as the governance in North and South Somalia is quite different. But it comes back to points that have been raised by other speakers, but also at the start of this session. The needs are well understood by local governance. Local governance usually have a very good idea of what their people need, and the people themselves know usually exactly where the mines are, or rather where they don't want to go. So our information comes from local people knowledge of the mines. Most of it doesn't come from national mine records, which don't exist, unlike in some other countries. So our information collection starts in local governance and the local people. We then often end up feeding that information back to the national level, and the national level then takes a different interest in What I have found in Somalia, my personal experience, is that actually the national government have been very receptive to responding to what is important to local communities when those local community requests go through what are seen to be the official structures of the government. So sometimes our work is encouraging local governments to use those mechanisms and to connect them to the right people at a federal and national level in order to facilitate our clearance. And it sometimes is a difficult and diplomatic sort of process, but it's one that's probably familiar to a number of people in this panel. You have to sort of find that balance and negotiate that access. But I think the point that it speaks to, that you sort of touched on at the start of that question, was that there's these social boundaries, cultural boundaries, there are international boundaries. What we're seeking to do in the regional project and in the regional line clearance project is to reduce some of the barriers that exist between resources and exist between peoples in order to facilitate better access. In order to remove one physical manifestation of what is essentially an ancient boundary or ancient conflict boundary. And by doing that, we seek to better connect the local to the sort of regional, or the local people to the local government to regional government even to national government, and indeed national government to other national government. Jane, do you have a perspective you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that obviously we face less of the terrorist type of security threat in Somaliland along the Ethiopian border, but there is an issue with a very fine balance between the clans. Now there were, up until fairly recently, complex and ongoing conflicts between the clans, but those have mostly been resolved. But Halo treads very carefully in terms of a detailed negotiation with those clan elders and recruitment across the clan, across all of the clans, to make sure that we, of course, do no harm, and in clearing that contamination, we maintain the very fine balance of power between those clan areas. But as I already said, it's very, the power bases certainly along that border area are very local, and the detailed information that we get is from those people on the ground who can feel very remoted from the governance structure back in the capital, Hargeisa. So, and we do ensure that we connect those layers of governance to that local level. Yeah. There is one other point about governance.
Did you want to add anything in?
Sorry, I think I just would like to make one final point.
No.
Talking of governance,
Yeah.
and the slightly diminished budgets that governments have had as a result of COVID. Of course, the other threat to security that's faced is that from physical stockpile of ammunition, the management of storage of explosives, and recent events, of course, have demonstrated that tragically in the Lebanon. But these risks are also faced, and it is another security challenge that is faced both in Somaliland and in Somalia. And that's often a security challenge that's very overlooked. And does normally pose a threat to urban populations, and where there are accidents, those accidents can be catastrophic. So it's another angle of security that Halo are looking to tackle, and indeed along with UNSCAR will be tackling in 2021. We're launching a side project to reinforce and make those storage areas safer for the military and the police.
Okay, that's a good initiative. Thank you very much, Jen. Tim, did you have a comment with regards to sort of border conflict in regions of cultural boundaries versus international boundaries, and how there's solutions available in terms of managing that conflict?
Yeah, thank you. Again, as I said before, you can go through a very rigorous mapping process and come up with what you think is the right boundary. But, at the end of the day, it comes down to the governments have to agree, the locals have to agree, that is the functional border. I think a lot of the countries in Africa inherited jurisdictional boundaries that were, created not by them. And that, it causes conflict because, you've got a border on a map that isn't necessarily a cultural border or a proper jurisdictional border. And it just, that's just the makings of conflict, especially if you add to it some sort of valuable resource, cocoa, gold, I mean, you name it. The minute there's a valuable resource somewhere near that line gets disputed even more rigorously. So that is just comment about, security from a, mapping perspective. Thank you.
And I think it's also important, and I can say from our experience of Saab, of working in Africa as well, is when you go into a community, by being involved in a country with certain projects, you've got to be aware of the stakeholders that you're engaging with and where you, how you engage with the people. And these, you've got to be sensitive to cultural and international borders. And I think the companies, especially bigger companies coming into Africa, must be mindful of the challenges that we have within the African continent. And to have initiatives to address those, be it starting small, even if it's just corporate social investment initiatives and a country strategy of dealing with these issues. We've had one question from our audience, and the question reads: what steps have been taken in your respective police and security forces to implement non-pain compliant ways of restraining subjects? And are you familiar with bowler wrap? So I think for our military panelists, to General Masanawa, I don't know if you want to maybe answer the question in terms of the security forces and ways of dealing with subjects, of restraining them.
Well, we actually refused to comply. That is the COVID-19 committee that were established by the government are responsible for handling that. The military are not actually involved in enforcing the situation. Our hands are full. We are busy fighting insurgents. The military, bulk of us are involved in operations. So here we leave it actually to other security agencies and other government medical officials really to handle. Thank you.
Okay. I think events from earlier this year have shown that there's immense pressure on military and security forces to deal in a certain way that is not always conducive to the way that we've been trained. And I think from a former military person, it is different to having to change your doctrine and the way that you approach these sort of operations. But I think we're going to bring this panel to a close, and I just want to highlight a couple of things that stand out for me. In terms of where we stand with Africa and the borders, I think we have big challenges with the porous nature of the borders in Africa, and the threat that these porous borders have to economic prosperity of the continent and the individual countries. And I think there's scope for technology to step to the fore, to provide solutions to the challenges that these porous borders have. Insurgency, especially with what General Masanawa has alluded to and described in his comments today, insurgency in Nigeria is a major threat to the stability for everyday life in certain parts in Nigeria. And I commend the Nigerian armed forces for their efforts in keeping the citizens safe on a day-to-day basis. And then the demining efforts, the work that Halo Trust is doing in East Africa of trying to establish safe areas to minimize the risk to individuals and people that are innocent civilians that might just be walking on a normal route, to try and reduce that risk. I think that is a commendable project. And I think that Africa as a continent in general would applaud the efforts involved in all the demining operations in East Africa. Because DCD Mobility, in terms of the vehicles that they provide in Africa, I think it speaks for themselves in terms of what you've mentioned, the statistics you provided, the comprehensive portfolio that you presented. And I think that's an eye-opener. And then one of the technologies that we've spoken about is geospatial data. Having all this new technology available to governments and government organizations and NGOs is important, and we need to embrace that technology from a architectural, engineering, and geospatial context as well to find solutions to solving Africa's porous borders. So to all our panelists, I thank you very much for your time, your expertise, and the contributions you had to today's panel. I think to the event organizers for organizing this event with the constraints that we had by hosting it as a virtual event. I thank you for your support. And then to the audience for committing your time and listening to us today, I think thank you very much. So if you have any other questions to our panelists, use the virtual platform that the Africa Security Symposium virtual event offers. So walk through and come and visit the different companies and come and see more about the thinking edge that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah.